Hello, sir. Good afternoon to you. Good day. And by the way, this is my recording for my natural language processing or CS286 machine problem presentation. So it's actually a bit of extensive here since this is from chapter 1 up until chapter 5. Since I was able to create a further research in terms of this one. So my topic is all about my study is actually all about the let me just go next. Corruption sentiment detection with a hybrid SBERT and association rule mining framework for subjectivity awareness. So I'm just basing here then because my reporting is all about detection. So that's why I'll be going to work on in terms of that here. Okay. So, for the introduction, governance challenge in infrastructures, corruption remains a persistent challenge to effective governance, particularly in large scale public infrastructures projects where financial magnitude, technical complexity, and institutional discretion intersect. In the Philippines, flood control initiatives represent one of the most critical yet controversial areas of public infrastructures governance. These projects are primarily implemented by the DPWH or Department of Public Works and Highways to mitigate the recurring impacts of flooding that threaten public safety, economic stability, and long term deployment. So, public scrutiny of DPWH flood control projects, despite their importance, DPWH flood control projects are frequently subjected to public scrutiny, skepticism, and allegations of corruption. These concerns are often articulated through informal public discourse rather than formal accountability mechanism. And this pattern reflects how perceptions of governance performance are voiced in public spaces according to Conjoico 2015 and SCAP 2016. And for the social media as a platform for public engagement, the growing prominence of social media has transformed how citizens express perceptions of governance, accountability, and institutional integrity. It enables individuals to share experiences, express opinions, and react to government interventions in real time. This produces large volumes of and structured textual data reflecting public sentiment toward infrastructures, projects, and disaster risk management policies according to Augie 2018 and SCAP 2016. Now, why corruption discourse is hard to analyze? Sentiment analysis in corruption related discourse present methodological challenges. Corruption discussions often involve indirect, nuanced, or implied evaluations rather than overt expressions of opinion. So this makes governance related sentiment harder to capture through surface level sentiment signals alone, according to Lorini 2022 and General 2024. Now, limitations of traditional sentiment analysis. A central limitation of traditional sentiment analysis approaches is their insufficient treatment of subjectivity. Many methods distinguish between objective statements and subjective opinions in corruption related discussions. Evaluative meaning may be embedded in factual narratives to express distrust or suspicion without explicit accusation, according to Conjueco 2015. Now, for subjectivity detection and its categories, subjectivity detection addresses this gap by differentiating objective content from subjective expressions. It further categorizes into explicit and implicit forms. Explicit subjectivity involves the direct expression of judgment, while implicit subjectivity is conveyed through subtle linguistic cues, contextual framing, or associative language patterns, according to Lorini 2022. Now, why explicit and implicit subjectivity matter? Accurately identifying both explicit and implicit subjectivity is essential for reliable interpretation of public sentiment and governance related discourse. This is especially relevant when public expressions include indirect evaluation rather than direct claims. Subjectivity aware analysis improves how corruption related perceptions are interpreted in sensitive public discussions, according to Gustafson and Woodworth 2014 and Shire, and Alvanites 2022. Now, SBERT for semantic understanding. Recent advances in natural language processing have enabled more sophisticated modeling, a semantic meaning in text. There will be Sentence-BERT or SBERT, a transformed-based model has demonstrated strong performance in capturing contextual and semantic relationship at the sentence level. This makes it effective for analyzing nuance and context dependent discourse, such as corruption related sentiment, according to Wei et al. 2025. So, the interpretability concern in government's research. While expert enhances semantic understanding, exclusive reliance on deep learning models may reduce interpretability. So interpretability is important in governance and policy research, where the transparency and explainability are critical. This creates a need to balance semantic accuracy with methods that support clear analytical reasoning, according to Gustafson and Woodworth, 2014. Now, the hybrid framework motivation. To balance semantic accuracy and interpretability, this adopt a hybrid analytical framework integrating SBERT with feature-based analysis and association rule mining. So I will be going to work on with hybrid method. Feature-based linguistic analysis extract interpretable indicators of subjectivity, while clustering techniques support the identification of latent groupings linked to implicit and explicit subjectivity. Association rule mining strengthen the framework by uncovering recurring feature features combinations that characterize implicit sentiment patterns through rule-based explanation, according to Fu et al. 2025, Lei et al. 2019, and Wei et al. 2025. For the structured pipeline design, the methodological design follows a structured analytical pipeline from minimal pre-processing and exploratory analysis to feature extraction, clustering, semantic modeling, and rule-based reasoning. This supports subjectivity-aware sentiment detection by grounding analysis in interpretable features before refining classification through semantic embeddings and association rules, by explicitly modeling implicit and explicit subjectivity. The framework captures how corruption related perceptions are articulated in DPWH flood control discourse. Now, it is also aligned in SDG 16 alignment and data set application. This research aligns with Sustainable Development Goal SDG 16, emphasizing peace, justice, and strong institutions. Using a DPWH flood control data set from social media platform or post and public narrative, the study applies the hybrid SBERT and association rule mining framework to analyze corruption-related sentiment and varying forms of subjectivity. Subjectivity labels are derived through quantile-based pseudo-label using an implicitness score, producing implicit and explicit and neutral or mixed categories, according to SCAP 2016 and Shin et al. 2024. Now, I'll proceed to the statement of the problem. The core analytical challenge, corruption-related sentiment expressed in public discourse, presents a complex analytical challenge. And this challenge is intensified when opinions are conveyed indirectly rather than through explicit evaluative statements. In corruption-related discussions, meaning is often implied instead of stated directly. The context of DPWH flood control discourse in discussions surrounding public infrastructures projects such as a flood control initiative implemented by the DPWH, public perceptions often focus on inefficiency, misuse of funds, or lack of transparency. These perceptions are commonly articulated through subtle linguistic cues embedded in seemingly neutral narratives. This makes corruption sentiment difficult to detect using surface level indicators alone. Now, in social media amplification, social media platforms amplify these expressions of corruption related sentiment. They generate large volumes of unstructured textual data that reflect public sentiment. This creates an environment where public discourse becomes a large scale source of government related opinion signals. Limitation of existing approaches. However, existing sentiment analysis approaches remain limited in their ability to accurately distinguish between implicit and explicit subjectivity within such discourse. This limitation becomes more critical in sensitive contexts such as corruption. These constraints motivate the need for subjectivity aware methods, according to Conjoico 2015 and Lorini 2022. Now, research direction based on the limitation. Given this limitation, this study is guided by the question of how advanced semantic modeling and pattern based analytical techniques can be combined. And the purpose is to improve the subjectivity aware, sentiment detection, and corruption related public discourse. And this direction responds directly to the inability of traditional methods to capture indirect evaluation reliably. Now, my main research question here, specifically, this study seeks to answer the following research question. How can a hybrid sentence BERT or SBERT association rule and the association rule mining framework be applied to detect and classify implicit and explicit subjectivity in public sentiment regarding corruption in DPWH flood control projects? And this research question defines the framework level solutions the study will implement and evaluate. There will be sub questions for that. First, for the SBERT focus. To further examine this problem, the study is guided by the following sub question. How can Sentence-BERT capture contextual and semantic nuances in public discourse related to corruption in DPWH flood control projects? And the sub question focuses on semantic modeling and how meaning level representation supports nuance interpretation. Second, focus on the association rule mining. How does association rule mining contribute to identifying recurring linguistic and feature-based pattern associated with implicit subjectivity? And this sub-question focuses on pattern discovering and rule-based interpretability, and that targets the need to explain how implicit subjectivity is signaled through feature combinations. Then, for the third question, focuses on implicit versus explicit differentiation. Now, to what extent can the hybrid SBERT and association rule mining framework distinguish between implicit and explicit subjectivity in corruption-related public comments? This question examines the framework's ability to separate indirect evaluations from direct evaluative statement, and it directly tests whether the hybrid designs improve subjectivity differentiation. Then the fourth question, the comparison to traditional approaches. How does the proposed hybrid framework performed in comparison to traditional sentiment analysis approaches in terms of subjectivity awareness and interpretability? And this sub-question evaluates whether the hybrid method improves both detection, capability, and explainability. It positions the proposed framework against limitation observed in conventional models. The fifth question is focusing on governance and is DG 16. How can insight derived from subjectivity aware sentiment analysis support the transparency, accountability, and institutional trust in line with SDG 16? And this question links analytical results to governance objectives and institutional strengthening. It frames the study relevance beyond technical performance. Now, what the study will do. In addressing this question, this study aims to design, implement, and evaluate a hybrid sentiment analysis framework. And this framework enhances the detection and classification of subjectivity in large and structured social media data set by integrating semantic embeddings with interpretable pattern discovery techniques. And the study contributes methodological improvements and support a more accurate and actionable understanding of public perceptions of corruption in DPWH flood control projects. Now, my objectives will be operationalizing the framework. And this study operationalizes a subjectivity aware corruption sentiment detection framework through a structured text analytics pipeline. Now, that pipeline progresses from data ingestion and minimal pre-processing to feature-based exploration, semantic modeling using the sentence-BERT, association rule mining, the pseudo-label generation, and research-ready output generation. And this design directly addresses the limitation of conventional sentiment analysis in capturing nuance and indirect subjectivity, according to Wei et al. 2025 and Fu et al. 2025. Now, the rationality of the integrated approach. In response to the limitations of traditional sentiment analysis approaches, the study integrates semantic representation and interpretable pattern discovery. And this integration supports both analytical accuracy and methodological transparency. The framework is designed to balance semantic, the depth with explainability and governance related discourse analysis, and that is coded by Wei et al. 2025 and Fu et al. 2025. Now, the general objectives of this study. The general objective of this study is to design, implement, and evaluate a hybrid subjectively aware sentiment analysis framework. And the framework combines SBERT based semantic modeling and association rule mining, and that aims to enhance the identification and differentiation of implicit, explicit, and neutral or mixed subjectivity in corruption related public discourse associated with the DPWH flood control project. Now, for my objective one, computational environment and data ingestion. Specifically, the study aims to establish a reproducible computational environment and data ingestion process. And this involves performing dependency validation, loading the DPWH flood control dataset, and identifying and validating the textual fields using for analysis. And this objective ensures a stable, transparent, and verifiable foundation for all the subsequent analytical procedures. And then, for the second objective, minimal pre-processing and data set characterization. And the study also aims to apply minimal yet defensible pre-processing techniques such as URL removal and white space normalization. This procedures preserves linguistic structure while reducing the noise in the data. Basic text length statistics are computed and visualized to characterize the data and identify the potential and irregularities prior to modeling. Now, for this third objective, features, definition, and standardization. Furthermore, the study aims to define, extract, and standardize a set of linguistic and statistical features relevant to subjectivity detection, and the distribution of these features are examined using descriptive statistics and visualization techniques. And this supports an initial interpretable exploration of subjectivity signals embedded in public discourse. And the fourth objective will be feature-based clustering and interpretation. Building on the extracted feature space, the study aims to identify an appropriate clustering structure using established validation measures. Cluster profiles are generated, distinguishing features, patterns, and are analyzed, and representative sample texts are examined also. These steps support preliminary subjectivity interpretation aligned with implicit, explicit, and neutral mixed expression of subjectivity, and that is coded by Lorini 2022. Now, the fifth objective will be lexical signals and validation. In addition, the study aims to identify characteristic lexical signals associated with different subjectivity groupings with using the TF or IDF analysis. These groupings are validated through qualitative sample inspections, dimensionality reduction using principal component analysis or the PCA, and data integrity checks. And these steps ensure analytical robustness, internal consistency, and interpretability as quoted by Lee et al. 2019. Now, for the sixth objective, subjectivity scoring and pseudo labeling. The study also aims to construct a subjectivity scoring mechanism. Quantile-based rule thresholding procedures are applied to derive transparent and explainable pseudo labels, and these labels represent the implicit, the explicit, and neutral or mixed subjectivity categories. Now, the seventh objective will be the SBERT semantic modeling. The study further aims to implement the SBERT by configuring the model and architecture and generating the sentence embedding in batch safe manner. Clustering is conducted in semantic space to capture deeper contextual relationships in corruption related discourse. And this step focuses on semantic coherence rather than surface level linguistic similarity, according to Wei et al. 2025. Now, for my eighth objective, comparing features and semantic groupings. The comparative analysis is conducted between the features-based groupings and embedding-based semantic clusters. And this comparison examines alignment, patterns indicative of implicit subjectivity tendencies, and the objective is to analyze consistency and divergence without enforcing direct class equivalence as coded by Wei et al. 2025. And then the association rule mining will be the ninth objective. Additionally, the study aims to operationalize association rule mining, and this involves transforming relevant linguistic and semantic indicators into the transactional representations and extracting high utility rules using the established algorithms. And this rule serves as an interpretable weak predictive mechanism for analyzing implicit subjectivity patterns. Now, the 10th objective, hybrid integration and output generation. Finally, the study aims to integrate semantic embeddings, features-based indicators, and rule-derived signals for their diagnostic comparison and subjectivity-aware interpretation. Ambiguous and borderline cases are examined descriptively. Structured outputs, including the tables, the figures, a label dataset, and appendices, are generated to promote transparency, reproducibility, and future research and governance oriented. Sentiment analysis according to Gustafson and Woodworth 2014 and Wiltshire and Alvanides 2022. Now, here comes my significance of this study. This study is significant as it addresses critical methodological and practical gaps in corruption related sentiment analysis. It introduces a subjectively aware analytic framework tailored to governance and public infrastructures context. And this approach responds to the limitations of conventional sentiment analysis methods in handling nuanced public discourse. And for methodological contribution, by integrating the SBERT for semantic representation with association rule mining for interpretable pattern discovery, the study enhances subjectivity detection. The framework supports the identification and differentiation of implicit and explicit and neutral or mixed subjectivity. So this contribution is particularly relevant where corruption-related options are conveyed indirectly, as coded by Lorraine 2022 and Gustafson and Woodworth 2014. Now, significance for government institutions for the DPWH. For government institution and policy implementers, particularly the DPWH, this study provides an empirical and systematic approach to understanding the public sentiment. And the framework enables the detection of subtle expressions of dissatisfaction, distrust, or concern that may not appear in formal reporting channels. These insights support evidence-based project evaluation and institutional self-assessment, according to SCAP 2016 and Shenadal 2024. Now, support for transparent governance by revealing patterns of implicit and neutral or mixed subjectivity in public discourse. This study contributes to more transparent governance strategies, and the findings can inform more responsive and accountable decision-making process. So this strengthened the institutional awareness of public perception beyond the explicit complaints according to SCAP 2016 and General 2024. Now, this is also significant for the disaster risk management agencies. For that agencies and local government units in flood-prone areas, this study offers insight into how public sentiment toward flood mitigation initiatives is expressed in social media. Understanding this perception is essential for improving the risk communication and community engagement. And the framework support better interpretation of public responses to flood control intervention as quoted by OGI 2018 and ASCAP 2016. Now, it will also it might improve the public cooperation and communication. So the ability to distinguish their implicit and explicit and neutral or mixed subjectivity, it will allow agencies to contextualize public reactions more accurately. And this understanding help adjust communication, strategies for disaster preparedness and mitigation. As a result, for public cooperation and trust can be strengthened, according to OGI 2018 and ASCAP 2016. Now, it is also significance for communities and citizens. For communities and social media users affected by DPWH control project, a flood control project, the study supports more transparent and accountable governance. It strengthens how public concerns are systematically analyzed and interpreted. This enables institutions to recognize both overt and subtle expressions of public sentiment, according to SCAP 2016 and OGI 2018. Now, supporting trust and inclusive decision making. By capturing ambiguous or mixed evaluations, the framework promotes more informed decision making process. These processes acknowledge the community perspective in infrastructures development and disaster risk management. This contributes to building trust between the citizens and government institution, according to the SCAP 2016 and OGI 2018. Now, this is also significance for NLP and data science researchers. For researchers and practitioners in NLP and data science, this study contributes a hybrid methodological framework, and that balances semantic depth with interpretability through SBERT, features-based clustering, and association rule mining. And this approach is particularly suited for analyzing socially sensitive discourse, according to Lee et al. 2019 and Wade 20 et al. 2025 and Fu et al. 2025 as well. Now, advancing subjectivity-aware analysis, the framework extends sentiment analysis research by emphasizing the subjectivity awareness, explainability, and pseudo-label driven analysis. And these elements are essential for governance-oriented and ethically sensitive application. And the study demonstrates how advanced language models can be combined with transparent analytical techniques. According to Lee et al. 2019 and Wei et al. 2025 and Fu et al. 2025. Now, it is also significant for academic institutions. For academic institutions and future researchers, this study provides a structured and reproducible analytical pipeline. This pipeline can be adapted to other governance related domains, such as public service delivery, accountability, and public monitoring. And the documented methodology serves as a reference framework for future studies, according to Wiltshire and Alvanites 2022. Now let's proceed to the chapter 2, which is focusing into the literature review. So this will be the chapter 2, literature review. Start with the historical context. The purpose of the literature review, this chapter review relevant literatures that provides the theoretical and empirical foundations for the study. And it examines the historical development of sentiment analysis and subjectivity detection, and the review situates the study within existing research and identify the gaps that motivates the present investigation. Now, early use of social media in public discourse analysis. The integration of computational techniques into public discourse analysis developed alongside the rapid expansion of social media platforms. Early research examined social media primarily as a tool for information dissemination. This was especially evident in disaster related and infrastructures contexts where rapid reporting was critical. Now, social media and disaster infrastructure context. Studies on flood events and and in public infrastructure showed that the citizens use social media to share observations, report damages, and express concerns about government response. These platforms created a new layer of publicly accessible data relevant to governance and institutional accountability. Such scores expanded the scope of public participation in infrastructures monitoring as coded by the SCAP 2016. Now, the Philippine context and DPWH social media use. In the Philippine context, the DPWH increasingly utilize social media to communicate project updates. This platform were also used to receive public feedback. This reinforced the role of online discourse in shaping perceptions of public infrastructure's performance, according to Bulan and Ramos 2024. And for the shift from information to sentiment, as social media became embedded in governance and disaster risk management practices, researchers recognized that online discourse reflects more than factual information. It also captures public sentiment, expectation, and institutional trust. This realization shifted analytical focus toward understanding evaluative meaning in public discourse. And then, early analytical limitation. Early analytical approaches often treated social media expression as uniform signals of approval or dissatisfaction. These methods did not sufficiently account for linguistic framing. As a result, they struggled to capture nuanced evaluative meaning embedded in discourse as coded by SCAP 2016. For the blended nature of social media discourse, the subsequent studies emphasize that social media discourse blends experiential narratives, emotional responses, and evaluative judgment with factual reporting. And this blending poses challenges for automated analysis. Conventional methods struggled to distinguish objective description from subjective interpretation linked to accountability or corruption, according to the SCAP 2016. Now, early sentiment analysis approaches. Parallel developments occurred in sentiment analysis and natural language processing. Early sentiment analysis relied on lexicon based methods and classical machine learning techniques. These approaches were effective in detecting explicit sentiment marker such as positive or negative adjectives, according to Lay et al. 2019. Now, limitations in governance discourse. Despite their effectiveness, early sentiment analysis methods were insufficient for governance related discourse. Opinions in such contexts are often conveyed indirectly through implication, sarcasm, or narrative framing. The limitation reduced their effectiveness in corruption related analysis as quoted by Lee et al. 2019. Now, the emergence of subjectivity detection. This limitation led to the emergence of subjectivity detection as a distinct research focus. Subjectivity detection emphasizes identifying whether text expresses opinion or factual content, and this approach moves beyond sentiment polarity alone. Lee et al. 2019. And then the explicit and implicit subjectivity. Subsequent scholarship refined subjectivity detection by distinguishing between explicit and implicit subjectivity. Explicit subjectivity involves direct expression of opinion or emotion. Implicit subjectivity embeds evaluative meaning with a neutral or descriptive language, according to Lorini 2022. Now, The importance in corruption discourse. This distinction is particularly important in corruption-related discourse. Individuals may avoid overt accusation due to social, legal, or political sensitives. Instead, criticism is often communicated through indirect references and contextual cues, as quoted by Lorini 2022. And the Philippine governance discourse. In the Philippine governance context, public discussion on infrastructures projects frequently exhibit indirect evaluation. Such discourse reflect experiential accounts rather than explicit accusation. And this makes subjectivity aware analysis especially relevant according to Conjoico 2015. Now, advances in semantic modeling. Advancement in natural language processing introduced representation learning and transformer based models. And this model captures contextual relationship across words and sentences. This enables improved interpretation of nuances through language and social media discourse, as quoted by Wei et al. 2025. Now, sentence level embeddings. The sentence level embeddings approaches derived from transformer architectures demonstrated strong potential. They represent meaning beyond surface lexical patterns, and these approaches address earlier limitation in sentiment and approaches analysis according to the Way et al. 2025. Now, the interpretability concerns the use of large-scale social media dataset raised concern about interpretability and ethical accountability. Governance-related analysis require explainable and defensible analytical processes. These concerns are critical when research findings may influence public trust or institutional decisions, as quoted by Gustafson and Woodworth 2024. And the demand for transparent method. Methodological literatures emphasize the importance of transparent analytical strategies, and then the researchers must be able to explain how conclusions are derived from data. This reinforced their interest in combining advanced computation with interpretability, according to Wildshire and Alvanides 2022. And then association rule mining and text analysis. Within this context, I'm so sorry. Let me go back right there. Association rule mining emerged as a complementary analytical technique. It uncovers recurring relationship among linguistic and contextual features. This method gained relevance for identifying patterns linked to subjectivity, according to the Fu et al. 2025. And then interpretability of rule-based method. Rule-based pattern discovery enables researchers to articulate how features, combinations signal subjectivity, and this interpretability is especially valuable in corruption-related studies. Transparency and methodological clarity are essentials in governance research, as quoted by Fu et al. 2025. And then there will be shift toward hybrid frameworks. Taken together, this development reflects a shift toward subject-aware hybrid analytical frameworks. These frameworks balance the semantic depth and explainability. They are particularly suited for governance and public infrastructures discourse analysis. And then the foundation for the present study. This historical trajectory provides the conceptual and methodological implicit, I mean, foundation for the present study. The study seeks to identify the implicit, explicit, and neutral or mixed subjectivity in the PWH flood control discourse, and that adapts a transparent pseudo-label driven framework aligned with SDG 16. Now, that's the historical context. Let's move on to current trends in subjectivity aware sentiment analysis. For the emergence of transformer based models, recent trends in natural language processing have been shaped by the widespread adoption of transformer based models. Bidirectional encoder representations from transformers called BERT introduced contextualized representation of textual meaning. And this representation allow interpretation to vary dynamically based on surrounding linguistic context, according to Lee et al. 2019 and Garden et al. 2010. Now, current trend in subjectivity-aware sentiment analysis shift from traditional text references, representation. Transformer architectures mark a significant departure from earlier bag of words in static embeddings approaches. This shift led to substantial improvement in sentiment analysis, opinion mining, and public discourse analysis. As a result of that, transformer-based models became the foundational tools in contemporary sentiment analysis research, as highlighted by Lee et al. 2019. And then, the limitations of birth at the sentence level. While BERT performs well in token level contextual encoding, it is computationally inefficient for large scale sentence comparison tasks. This limitations is especially evident in similarity computations and clustering of short text. Such constraints motivated the development of um, s- sentence level embedding approaches by Wei et al. 2025. Now, the introduction of Sentence-BERT, which we are using, was introduced to address limitation related to sentence level semantic comparison. Then SBERT produces fixed length sentence embeddings that support efficient clustering and similarity computation. And this capability enables scalable semantic grouping in large textual data sets, according to Wei et al. 2025. And the importance of sentence level modeling in social media. Sentence level embeddings are particularly important in social media analysis. Opinions and evaluations are often expressed as concise, standalone statements rather than long documents. SBERT design aligns well with the structures of social media discourse, according to Golder et al. 2019 and Wang et al. 2024. And the relevance to governance related discourse, SBERT has become increasingly relevant for analyzing nuanced sentiment expression and governance related discourse. Sentence level modeling enables more precise interpretation of short context dependent messages, and this is critical in discussions involving public policy and institutional performance, according to the Wei et al. 2025. Now, capturing implicit evaluative meaning. Sentence level embeddings are emphasized in studies of opinion, health, policy, and governance discourse. They enable models to capture implicit evaluative meaning embedded within factual narratives and contextual framework, such as frameworks are common in corruption related discussions. Lorini 2022 and General 2024 highlighted that. Now, sentence level modeling as a key trend. As a result, the sentence level semantic modeling has emerged as a critical trend in sentiment analysis research. And this trend improves the sensitivity to implicit and context dependent subjectivity. It supports more nuanced interpretations of public discourse, according to Lorini 2022. And then the interpretability challenges of transformer models. Despite strong performance, transform based models raised concern regarding interpretability and transparency. Models such as BERT and SBERT functions as complex black box systems. This makes it difficult to explain how specific linguistic features influence classification's outcome, as highlighted by Gustafson and Woodworth 2014. And For the ethical and methodological concerns, lack of explainability, possess ethical and methodological challenges in governance and public policy research. Accountability and trust are essential when analyzing socially sensitive topics. Opaque models may undermine the credibility and corruption related sentiment analysis findings, as quoted by Wiltshire and Alvanites 22nd, 2022, and Ford et al. 2021. And then the rise of hybrid analytical approaches. In response, a growing body of research advocates hybrid analytical approaches. And these approaches integrate deep learning models with interpretable analytical methods. Hybrid frameworks aim to retain semantic power while improving transparency, as quoted by Lee et al. 2019. And then the role of features-based linguistic analysis. Hybrid frameworks combine transformer-based representation with feature-based linguistic analysis. Feature-based method extract transparent indicators such as lexical patterns and structural cues. And these indicators can be directly examined and validated by researchers, as quoted by Lee et al. 2019 and Al-Zaman 2018. And for rule-based reasoning and interpretability, rule-based reasoning, particularly association rule mining, has emerged as a complementary technique. It identifies recurring and co-occurrence patterns among linguistic and semantic features, and these patterns are expressed as human readable rules, as quoted by Fu et al. 2025. Now, association rule mining and public opinion analysis. Association rule mining explains why certain expressions are linked to implicit or explicit subjectivity. And this is especially effective where evaluative language is indirect. Such characteristics are common in corruptions and governance discourse. Lorini 2022 and General 2024 highlighted that. Now, methodological pluralism in sentiment analysis. Hybrid approaches reflect a broader trend toward methodological pluralism, combining multiple analytical perspectives yields more robust and policy relevant insights. This trend is emphasized in disaster risk management and governance analytical, as highlighted by SCAP 2016, Augie 2018, and Tipolo et al. 2017. Now, for balancing accuracy and accountability, by balancing semantic accuracy with interpretability, hybrid framework addresses ethical and technical concerns. They meet performance required while supporting transparency and accountability. This balance is critical for governance-oriented research applications, as quoted by Wiltshire and Alvanites 2022. And the convergence towards integrative frameworks. Overall, current trends highlight the convergence toward integrative sentiment analysis framework. These frameworks leverage the transformer-based modeling while mitigating limitation through interpretable methods, and they enable subjectivity-aware analysis that remains methodologically defensible, as quoted by Wei et al. 2025. And the relevance to corruption and governance research. This convergence support the identification of implicit, explicit, and neutral mixed evaluative expression. Such capabilities, and particularly suited to corruption-related discourse, they align with the analytical demands of governance oriented research context, as quoted by Wei et al. 2025 and Wildchild and Albanides 2022. So that's the end for the current trends, and let's try to work on with the related literature. Okay, so for the related literature, corruption sentiment as a research domain. Corruption sentiment analysis lies at the intersection of governance studies, public opinion research, and computational linguistics. In public infrastructures and disaster-related context, corruption is rarely articulated through direct accusations. Instead, it is embedded in narratives of inefficiency, misallocations of resources, and institutional distrust, according to Conjoico 2015 and Lorini 2022. Now, the indirect nature of corruption discourse. Prior studies emphasize that corruption related discourse often manifest through indirect evaluative language and rhetorical framing, such discourse relies on implication rather than explicit claims. This pattern is especially common in political sensitive environments where overt allegation carry legal or social risk, according to Conjoica 2015 and Lorini 2022 still. Now, the implication for sentiment analysis, the indirect natures of corruption discourse, differentiates it from general sentiment expression. It necessitates analytical approaches that distinguish subjective interpretation from objective reporting. Without subjectivity awareness, evaluative meaning may remain undetected. And then social media and governance communication. The growing reliance on social media has increased the visibility of corruption related discourse, and social media platforms serve as spaces where citizens report infrastructures, conditions, and evaluate public spending. And these platforms are especially active during disaster events such as flooding. SCAP 2016 and Augie 2018 and Tipolo 2025 highlighted that. And then social media as a data source. Research in disaster risk management shows that social media captures both situational awareness and evaluative judgment. Public frustration, suspicion, and distress are often expressed alongside factual update, and this makes social media a rich textual source for corruption sentiment analysis, which is being highlighted by ESCOP 2016 and Augie 2018. And then the strength of social media data. Governance analytics studies highlight the immediacy and scale of social media data. These platforms captures grassroots perspective often absent from formal reporting mechanism. Such data enable real-time analysis of public perception as quoted by Ogi et al. 2022 and Bulan and Ramos 2024. And then the Philippine context and DPWH discourse. In the Philippine context, studies show that the citizens actively engage with DPWH social media pages. Users report flood-related issues and comment on project responsiveness and effectiveness. This discussion implicit link operational outcomes to perceptions of integrity and accountability, as Bulan and Ramos 2024 highlighted. Then, limitations of social media data. Despite their strength, social media data sets present significant limitations, and this includes the high noise level, and verified claims, and uneven participation and speculative allegations. Distinguishing legitimate criticism from misinformation remains a major analytical challenge, according to Gustafson and Woodworth 2014, then the Wiltshire and Albanite 22. Then limits of polarity-based sentiment analysis. Traditional sentiment analysis approaches focus on polarity classification, and they often ignore whether text is subjective or objective. And this limitation is particularly problematic in corruptions and governance studies, as highlighted by Lee et al. 2019. The polarity versus corruption meaning. In corruption discourse, a negative factual statement does not necessarily imply corruption sentiment. Conversely, neutral sounding statements may imply misconduct through context or association. And this highlights the inadequacy of polarity-only sentiment models by Lee et al. 2019 still. And emergence of subjectivity classification. As a result, subjectivity classification has emerged as a critical analytic step. It focuses on identifying whether text expresses opinion or factual reporting. And this distinction is essential for interpreting corruption-related discourse accurately. And then, The explicit and implicit subjectivity. Subjectivity research distinguishes between explicit and implicit subjectivity, where explicit subjectivity involves the direct expression of judgment or opinion, and implicit subjectivity embeds evaluative meaning with descriptive or contextual language as coded by Lorini 2022 and Alzeman 2018. And for implicit subjectivity in corruption discourse, implicit subjectivity is especially prevalent in corruption related discussion. Individuals may strategically avoid direct accusation. Failure to detect implicit subjectivity leads to underestimation and misclassification of evaluative sentiment, according to Chanel in 2024 and Sovire 2021. Now, the advances in NLP and semantic modeling. Advances in NLP improve contextual meaning representation. Transformer-based models such as BERT introduced contextualized word embeddings. These models outperform the opinion mining task. The traditional approaches in sentiment and opinion mining task then, according to the Lee et al. 2019. And now we also do have the Sentence-BERT and sentence level modeling. According to this, to Wang et al. And Wei et al. 2025 and 2024, Sentence-BERT enables efficient sentence level embeddings and supports clustering and I'm so sorry, clustering, similarity measurement, and representation learning. For short text, sentence level modeling is especially relevant for social media discourse also. And then for interpretability, challenges of deep learning. Despite their effectiveness, transformer-based models raise concerns about interpretability, and these models operate as black boxes, limiting explanation of classification's outcome. And this is problematic in governance and public policy context, as highlighted by Gustafson and Woodworth 2014 and Welchshire and Albanites 2022. Now, the ethical concerns in governance analysis. Lack of explainability raises ethical concerns when analytical outcomes influence institutional trust. Opaque models may undermine accountability and credibility. Scholars caution against exclusive reliance on deep learning for sensitive analysis, according to Ford et al. 2021. And a shift toward hybrid framework, recent literature advocates hybrid analytical frameworks. This combines semantic modeling with interpretable methods. The goal is to balance analytical accuracy with transparency, as highlighted by Fu et al. 2025 and Raman 2020. Now, the role of hybrid approaches. Association rule mining support discovery of recurring interpretable features pattern. It has been applied to public opinion and social behavior studies, and that method is well suited for detecting indirect evaluative signals, as highlighted by Fu et al. 2025. And then the benefit of hybrid approaches. Hybrid approaches integrate deep learning, feature-based analysis, and role-based reasoning. Studies shows this combination yield more robust and policy-relevant insights. They are emphasized in governance and disaster communication research, as highlighted by Shen et al. And Augie et al. 2022 and Tipolo 2025 then. Now, the identified research gap, despite progress, existing research remains fragmented. Governance studies often lack subjectivity-aware modeling, while NLP studies sacrifice interpretability, and then few studies integrate SBERT features-based indicators and association rule mining. And then motivation for present study. This gap underscores the need for hybrid subjectivity-aware framework, and the framework must distinguish objective reporting from explicit and neutral or mixed subjectivity. Then the methodological rigor and interpretability are especially critical in public infrastructures and flood control discourse. And let's move on to the chapter 3, which is the methodology and the overview of methodological framework. The purpose of methodology chapter, the chapter presents the methodological framework used to design and implement the proposed hybrid sentiment analysis approach. And the framework supports subjectivity-aware corruption detection in public discourse, and that emphasizes the transparency, interpretability, and robustness in subjectivity classification. And then The components of the hybrid framework here. The methodology describes data preparation, procedures, features, extraction, and exploratory analysis, and also covers clustering and validation techniques, semantic modeling using SBERT, and association rule mining. These components are integrated into a unified analytical pipeline. We will begin to work on that one by one. Okay. For the dataset description, this study utilizes the data composed of social media posts and public narrative related to DPWH flood control project. Social media provides rich user-generated content reflecting public perceptions and evaluative judgment. And the dataset serves as primary purpose for corruption-related sentiment analysis according to the SCAP 2016 and August 2018. And then the relevance of social media data. Social media discourse captures experiences, opinions, and reactions to government interventions, and this is particularly relevant to in disaster risk management and infrastructures governance context. Such data enables analysis of implicit, explicit, and neutral mixed subjectivity in public discourse, as quoted by SCAP 2016 and OGI 2018. Now, for establishing a reproducible environment, the analytical workflow, reproducible environment, begins with establishment of a reproducible computational environment. This includes dependency, validation, and library initialization. And these steps ensure consistency and reliability across analytical stages. And for the dataset ingestions and structure, the dataset is uploaded and loaded into the analysis environment in a structured tabular format. And this allows systematic access and processing of textual data, structured ingestion, supports traceability and reproducibility. And for identification of the textual field, the textual field representing the primary unit of analysis is explicitly identified and validated. And this field typically corresponds to a social media post or comment body. All subsequent analysis operate exclusively on this standard text column according to Lee et al. 2019. Now, for ensuring for the dataset scope and text field identification, ensuring analytical consistency, restricting analysis to a validated text column ensures analytical consistency, and that support traceability across pre-processing, feature extraction, semantic modeling, and role-based analysis, and that this practice is essential in large-scale text analytics and governance research as highlighted by Lee et al. 2019. Now, for the rationale for minimal pre-processing for the minimal text processing strategy, pre-processing is intentionally minimal to preserve critical linguistic use. Aggressive normalization techniques may remove stylistic or evaluative information. Preserving such cues is really essential for subjectivity-aware sentiment analysis according to Lorini 2022. And for the noise reduction procedures, the study focuses on removing high noise elements that do not contribute to sentiment in interpretation. And uniform resource locators or the URLs are removed to eliminate link-related artifacts. Excess white space is normalized to ensure consistent formatting as well. That is for the minimal text processing strategy. And justification of the conservative approach, and this conservative preprocessing strategy aligns with prior research and implicit sentiment analysis, retaining original linguistic structures, improved detection of nuanced evaluative expression, and that approach is particularly relevant for social media discourse as highlighted by Lorini 2022, Wiltshire, and Albanese 2022 as well. Now, the purpose of exploratory validation following pre-processing technique, descriptive statistics are computed to characterize the data set. This measures assess data set suitability for downstream model, exploratory validation support detection of data quality issue. And then for the text length statistic, word count and character count measures are computed for each textual entry, and these statistics provide an overview of text length distribution, and they also help identify extreme outliers. And afterwards, visualization and irregularity detection. Word count, this is for descriptive statistic and exploratory validation. Word count distributions are visualized to examine data spread. This step helps detect irregularities such as the extremely short or initially long entries. Such validation is important when working with heterogeneous social media data, according to SCAP 2016. Now, the avoidance of linguistic, that is for the preservation of linguistic structure, no stemming, lemmatization, or stop word removal is applied. This operation may obscure Saudel evaluative signals and contextual framing. Avoiding them preserve stylistic and syntactic information according to Gustafson and Woodworth 2014. Now, the importance of preserving original text or the preservation of linguistic structures is actually maintaining original syntax, phrasing, and punctuation support nuance analysis. This allows feature-based method, which is SBERT embeddings and association row mining to capture implicit patterns. Preservation is essential for subjectivity-aware classification according to the Lorraine et al. 2022. Now, supporting subjectivity differentiation for preservation of linguistic structures. Preserving linguistic structures ensures that implicit, explicit, and neutral or mixed cues remain intact, and this support transparent interpretation across analytical stages. And that strengthens the reliability of subjectivity classification's outcome according to Gustafson and Woodward 2014 and Lorraine 2022. And the methodological foundation for the hybrid framework for all the data preparation procedures establish a clean yet linguistically rich corpus. This balance support noise reduction while preserving contextual meaning, and the result corpus enables robust and interpretable analysis of corruption-related DPWH flight control discourse. And for the role of feature extraction constitutes our critical stage in the proposed subject-aware sentiment analysis framework. It transforms raw textual data into structured representations suitable for exploratory analysis, clustering, and pattern discovery. This establishes also the explainable analytical foundation for subsequent modeling. And then for feature extraction and exploration, importance in corruption discourse. In corruption-related public discourse, linguistic and statistical features provide interpretable indicators of subjectivity. These features captures stylistic emphasis, narrative structures, and indirect evaluative tendencies. Such indicators are particularly relevant in social media text also. And then the relationship to the hybrid framework features extraction, complements later semantic modeling using SBERT. It also supports role-based reasoning through association rule mining. Together, these components form an explainable hybrid analytical framework. Then, the definition of linguistic and statistical features. Feature definition strategy. The study defines a set of basic linguistic and statistical features derived from minimally preprocessed text. And these features capture surface level properties associated with subjectivity. They focus on how opinions are expressed rather than semantic content. And then types of extracted features. Extracted features include text length, measures such as word count and character count. Punctuation-based indicators and frequency-based signals are also included. And these features reflect intensity, emphasis, and verbosity and narrative framing also. And then for the interpretive value of the value of the feature set. Such features provides observable cues for distinguishing objective narration from subjective expression. Then they are especially useful for identifying explicit, and neutral mixed subjectivity. This relevant is well established in socially sensitive discourse analysis as according to Lee et al. 2019 and Lorini 2022. Now, the definition of linguistic and statistical features, design principle of feature selection. The selection feature set is intentionally general and domain agnostic. This design support interpretability and methodological transparency, and that avoids imposing predefined sentiment labels on the data. And then the feature compilation, once defined linguistic and statistical features are computed for each textual entry, this process converts raw text into numerical features vectors. Then this vector serves as input for downstream analysis. And the need for feature standardization. Features vary in normally a numerical scale and magnitude. I'm so sorry. To ensure comparability, standardization is applied prior to clustering and visualization. This prevents scale dominance in analytical outcome. And for standardization technique, feature scaling is performed using normalization or standardization techniques. Values are rescaled to a common range or distribution. Then the relative variation within the dataset is preserved also for the feature extraction and standardization method. And for the importance of unsupervised analysis, standardization is particularly important for unsupervised methods such as K-means clustering. These methods are sensitive to feature scale. Proper scaling ensures a meaningful distance-based analysis according to Lee et al. 2019. Now, let's move on to the exploratory features analysis and visualization. The purpose of exploratory analysis examines the distributional properties of extracted features, and that will assess the relevance to subjectivity-aware sentiment analysis, and that step support inform modeling decision also. Now, descriptive statistic, feature level descriptive statistics are computed. This include measures of central, tendency, and dispersion. They characterize overall patterns within the corpus. And the visualization of features behavior. Visualization techniques such as distribution plot and the comparative chart are applied. This visualization inspect features behavior across the data set. They help identify emerging patterns linked to subjectivity. And then for diagnostic use of visualization are used diagnostically rather than inferentially, which support understanding of data structures and potentially separability. No definitive conclusions are drawn at this stage according to Lee et al. 2019. And then the relevance of features to subjectivity detection focus on subjectivity rather than polarity. The extracted features are selected for subjectivity detection rather than sentiment polarity, classification, and corruption. And discourse evaluative meaning is often indirect, stylistic, and structural cues become more informative than explicit sentiment markers according to Lorini et al. 2022. Now, the relevance of features to subjectivity detection, capturing implicit and explicit verbosity, emphasis, and structural variation provide indirect signals of implicit subjectivity. They also support identification of explicit and neutral mixed expression, and these patterns are common in corruption-related public discourse according to Lorini 2022. And then interpretability and analytical transparency. Grounding analysis, interpretable features pattern supports transparent reasoning, and that allows researchers to explain why texts exhibit subjective characteristics, and that will strengthen the methodological accountability. And for the integration with later analytical stages, extracted features serve as input for clustering and rule-based pattern discovery. They are also compared with semantic embeddings generated using SBERT. This integration strengthens hybrid analytical interpretation according to Fu et al. And Wei et al. 2025. And then afterwards, the relevance of features to subjectivity detection, contributions of feature extraction stage. Overall, features extraction establishes an interpretable feature space for subjectivity-aware analysis that supports exploratory analysis, clustering validation, and explainable modeling. And this stage enhances both analytical rigor and methodological transparency. That is for the first step. Now, for the clustering and validation. Role of clustering in a framework. Clustering is employed as an unsupervised exploratory technique to identify latent groupings in the in extracted feature space. And these groupings may correspond to different patterns of subjectivity expression in corruption-related public discourse. And clustering enables discovery of structures without relying on predefined labels. And then suitability for subjectivity aware analysis. Unlike supervised classification, clustering does not assume fixed subjectivity categories, and this makes it suitable for social media discourse where evaluative meaning may be implicit, explicit, or unambiguous. The approach aligns with exploratory nature of subjectivity analysis. And then relationship to the previous stages. This stage builds upon the standardized linguistic and statistical features extracted earlier. Clustering provides an intermediate analytical representation, and that supports later stages such as semantic modeling and rule-based analysis. And then, for the application of clustering algorithm, choice of clustering method. The study applies k-means clustering of the to the standardized feature set. Then the textual entries are grouped based on similarity in linguistic and statistical characteristics, and k-means is selected for this efficiency, interpretability, and widespread use in text mining research, according to Lee et al. Then the importance of applications for of clustering problem algorithms for the feature scaling. Prior to clustering, feature scaling is applied to the dataset. K-means relies on distance-based calculations and is sensitive to proportionally features magnitude. Scaling ensures that all features contribute proportionally, according to Lee et al. 2019. Then, for application of clustering algorithm, the exploratory name of clustering, the clustering process does not enforce predefined sentiments or subjectivity or categories. Instead, it surfaces the emergent groupings based on linguistic expression patterns. This design preserves analytical openness during exploration. And then linguistic differences across clusters. Emergent clusters may reflect differences in evaluative emphasis, narrative elaboration, or stylistic neutrality. And that differences correspond to implicit, explicit, or neutral mixed subjectivity aware tendencies. And the approach aligns with gradational views of subjectivity, according to Lorini 2022. Now, cluster validation using quantitative metrics. Purpose of cluster validation, quantitative validation metrics are applied to assess cluster coherence and separability. Validations ensures that the clusters represent meaningful, structured, and feature space. This support methodological rigor in unsupervised analysis. Then, cluster validation using quantitative metrics, use of the silhouette coefficient. The silhouette coefficient is used the primary validation metric, measures how well observation fit within their assigned clusters relative to others. The metric does not require a ground truth labels, according to Lee et al. 2019. Then the cluster validation using quantitative metrics, suitability for exploratory settings. The silhouette score is well suited for exploratory and unsupervised learnings, analysis, and that provides internal evaluation of clustering quality, and that aligns for subjectivity aware research context, according to Lee et al. 2019. And then diagnostic use of validation metrics. Validation metrics are used diagnostically rather than inferentially. They guide selection of reasonable clustering configuration. They do not imply definitive classifications outcome also. Now, for cluster profiling and descriptive analysis, the purpose of cluster profiling. Following validation, cluster profiling is conducted to characterize each cluster, and descriptive statistic is computed at the cluster level. And then this supports systematic interpretation of subjectivity related differences. Now, features level cluster analysis. Feature level means and distributions are calculated for each cluster. This statistic identifying, distinguishing a linguistic and statistical patterns, comparing cluster reveals variation in emphasis and structure. And then for the cluster profiling and descriptive analysis, qualitative sample inspection, representative sample text from each cluster examined quantitatively. Sample inspection illustrates how features meaning patterns appear in actual discourse, and that includes narrative framing and direct evaluation and explicit opinion also. And then, for the cluster profiling and descriptive analysis, combine quantitative and qualitative approach. Combining the statistical quality, profiling with sample inspection strengthen interpretability. Then this approach aligns with the best practices in governance and social media analysis, and that support context-aware understanding of cluster characteristic, according to the General and Augie 2028. Now, the interpretation of clusters as subjectivity candidates. So in this case, so in the interpreting cluster tendencies, you're preserving the analytical flexibility right there. So after that one, the explicit subjective tendencies. Well, clusters with strong stylistic emphasis, repetition, or evaluative framing are interpreted as explicit subjectivity tendencies. And these clusters reflect direct expression of opinion or judgment. Interpretation remains exploratory rather than conclusive. So Implicit and neutral or mixed tendencies with subtle cues represent descriptive narratives or contextual implication indicate implicit subjectivity. Excuse me. Clusters with limited evaluative signals are treated as neutral or mixed candidates. And this distinction reflect gradation in subjectivity expression. And then um, professional nature of cluster interpretation remain professional exploratory. They do not serve as final subjectivity classification. Instead, they inform later analytical stages. Those are observed by them. And then for the role in the hybrid framework, clustering provides an intermediate representation for subjectivity scoring and semantic modeling using the SBERT, and that also support rule-based pattern discovery and that preserve transparency and methodological rigor for those are stated by them. And contribution in the clustering stage, overall clustering and validation enable discovery of subjectivity related patterns. And the stage combines quantitative validation, descriptive profiling, and qualitative inspection. This establishes a structured, interpretable foundation for hybrid framework integration. Those are the things we need to consider. For the semantic modeling with SBERT, purpose of semantic modeling is incorporated to capture deeper contextual meaning in corruption-related studies, public discourse. Surface-level linguistic and statistical features may not fully represent nuanced evaluative signals. Semantic embeddings enable modeling of latent meaning and contextual relationship. And the role in subjectivity aware analysis provides interpretable indicators of subjectivity expression. And semantic modeling complements this by capturing implicit, explicit, neutral, or mixed evaluative meaning. Together, these approaches support a more comprehensive subjectivity awareness aware framework. In the selection of Sentence-BERT, to support semantic modeling, the study employs SBERT, which is the transformer-based model designed for efficient sentence-level semantic representation, and that is well suited for analyzing short, context-dependent social media text. And for the extension of the BERT architecture, the SBERT, excuse me, extends the bidirectional encoder representation from transformers. It introduces a Shamis network architecture for sentence representation. And this structures enables fixed length sentence embeddings according to those writers. And the computational efficiency of SBERT, unlike the standard BERT, it does not require expensive pairwise comparison. It generates dense vectors embeddings that can be directly compare, and this design significantly improve computational efficiency according to that references. And the suitability for social media analysis preserves contextual depth while enabling scalable semantic analysis, and that is really suitable for large-scale data set composed of short text, such as characteristic aligned with social media discourse. And then the application in governance and opinion research has been widely applied in opinion mining, governance analytics, and policy discourse. These domains often involve the indirect and context-dependent evaluative meaning, and this is supporting subjectivity aware analysis in such settings according to them. And embeddings generation process are generated by applying SBER to minimally process text. Each textual entry is transformed into dense numerical vectors, and this vector represents contextual meaning beyond surface structures. And then the batch safe processing is to ensure the scalability. Embeddings are generated in a batch safe manner, and this prevents memory overload during a large scale processing. And the approach to support computational stability and efficiency. And then for the preservation of semantic relationship, the embedding process preserves a relationship between words, phrases, and narratives. Texts with similar evaluative intent are positioned closely in semantic space, and which holds even when lexical realization differs. And then the importance of corruption discourse. This capability is critical in corruption-related discourse. Evaluative meaning may be conveyed through indirect expression or experiential framing. Semantic embeddings capture these subtle cues according to those one. In semantic space clustering, following embedding generation, clustering is performed in semantic space, and this identifies latent
groupings based on contextual similarity, and the process mirrors features-based clustering conceptually. And afterwards, the difference from feature-based clustering operates on dense embeddings rather than interpretable features, and that is emphasizing the meaning levels similarity rather than stylistic expression. This is providing a complementary analytic perspective. And for the interpreting of semantic clusters are not treated as definitive subjective labels. They are interpreted as contextual similarity groupings. These groupings may reflect the implicit, explicit, and neural mixed tendencies. And the purpose of comparative analysis, it captures features-based clusters with embedding-based clusters. The comparison evaluates alignment between stylistic indicators and semantic similarity, and that is supports the hybrid analytical design. And for the interpretation of convergence and divergence, suggests robust subjectivity signals across representations. Divergence highlights cases where semantic context captures meaning beyond a survey's features. That these patterns inform diagnostic interpretation. And then for non-hierarchical design, and I mean integration, no hierarchical authority is imposed between analytical layers. Features based and embeddings based result are treated as complementary. This preserves interpretive balance and transparency. And in a comparison of features based and embedding based groupings, prior research support integrating the contextual embeddings with interpretable methods, and this integration enhances the analytical depth while maintaining the transparency. Such balance is critical in governance-oriented research. And then the contribution of SBERT to the framework, modeling with SBERT enriches the analytical pipeline. It is also adding a contextual dimension to features driven and rule-based analysis, and that is strengthens the subjectivity detection capacity. And the overall role in the hybrid framework, by integrating semantic modeling with linguistic features analysis, the study improves interpretability and rigor. The approach supports nuanced analysis of corruptions related studies, subjectivity, remains aligned with governance focused research objectives. And the role of association rule mining is employed to enhance the interpretability and explainability in subjectivity aware sentiment analysis, and that uncovers recording patterns among linguistic, statistical, and semantic indicators. This method provides explicit human interpretable rules describing subjectivity expression tendencies also. And then the complementary role in the hybrid framework feature based clustering and SBERT modeling, identity Latin groupings are contextual similarity association rule mining, complements the stages by providing rule based explanation and functions as a diagnostic interpretive analytical layer. So it focuses on implicit subjectivity, wherein the particular important for analyzing implicit subjectivity, where evaluative meaning often emerge from combination of subtle cues. Rule-based reasoning captures these co-occurring patterns effectively. And the transformation of features into transactional format need for transactional representation to enable association in for the rule mining. Selected indicators are transformed into transactional format, and linguistic, statistical, and semantic features are included. This representation support pattern discovery across feature combination. And excuse me, the discretization of continuous features values are discretized into categorical states such as low, medium, and high, and it is based on distributional characteristic observed during exploratory analysis, and that step enable to enables rule extraction from numerical data. And then construction of transaction, each textual entry is represented as a transaction composed of features value items. The data set is treated as a collection of item sets, and then the structure is suitable for association rule extraction. And then analytical value of transactional data representation emphasizes co-occurring feature patterns and that avoids reliance on isolated features effects. And this approach is effective for corruption related discourse analysis according to those principles. And then the rule mining of algorithms is performed using established such as like the a priori or if the growth. And these algorithms are widely used for discovering frequent items, and they are supporting scalable rule extraction in large data set. And the key rule evaluation metrics is guided by support, confidence, and lift. Support measures rule frequency, confidence measures, and conditional probability, and lift measures strength beyond the chance. These metrics define rule relevance also. Then the parameter selection strategy, threshold values are selected conservatively. This balances interpretability with pattern stability. The goal is to avoid spurious associations. And the diagnostic use of rules, parameters are applied diagnostically rather than inferentially. They support exploratory discovery and interpretative analysis, and this aligns the best practices in patterns finding and text analytics. And the alignment with subjective groupings focuses on rules associated with subjectivity tendencies, rule consequent correspond to pseudo-label based subjectivity groupings, and that include implicit, explicit, and neutral mixed strategy categories also. And use of pseudo-labels are derived through quantile-based subjectivity scoring. They provide weak supervision for rule filtering, and that maintains the exploratory nature of the framework. And emphasis on implicit subjectivity. Special attention is given to rules linked to implicit subjectivity. Indirect evaluative expression is prevalent in corruption discourse. Rules reveal how much meaning emerges from combined cues also. And nature of identified patterns, identified rules highlight the narrative structure, stylistic emphasis, and contextual association. They explain indirect opinion expression, and that moves beyond overt and sentiment markers. And the qualitative interpretation of rules, extracted rules are interpreted qualitatively. Antecedent features combinations are examined for linguistic and semantic significance, and this provides transparent analytical insight. And addressing black box concern, rule interpretation addresses concerns associated with black box models, enables explanation of why text exhibit certain subjectivity tendencies. This is critical in governance oriented analysis also. Then the role within the hybrid framework function as unexplainable support mechanism. They do not serve as a standalone classifiers. Instead, they complement features-based and semantic modeling outputs. And in the ethical methodological alignment, our role aligns with ethical and methodological recommendation for transparency, explainability, and accountability are emphasized in socially sensitive research, and that principles are central to governance-focused sentiment analysis also. And then the contribution of association rule mining. Association rule mining translate complex feature and interactions into interpretable knowledge structures, and that strengthen the hybrid framework by supporting transparent reasoning. And that stage enhances the robust subjectivity-aware analysis of corruption-related discourse. And then the purpose of hybrid framework integration. The final stage of the methodology integrates semantic representation, feature-based analysis, and rule-based signals, explainability, and addresses limitation of using deep learning or rule-based methods in isolation. And rather than producing definitive ground truth, classification, the framework supports subjectivity-aware differentiation. And that synthesizes the complementary analytical signals into a coherent pseudo-labeling process, and that design preserves the analytical nuance also. And a role of SBERT embeddings here will provide dense semantic representation, capturing the contextual meaning and latent similarity, and will enable also modeling of nuance and indirect evaluative expression in corruption-related discourse, but semantic similarity alone does not provide explicit interpretability reasoning. But the need of rule-based explainability will to address the interpretability limitation. Rule-based signals from association rule mining are incorporated and important because these signals encode the recurring combination of linguistic, statistical, and semantic indicators, and they function as an explanatory analytical layer also. So the multi-layer analytical integration will examine the convergence and divergence across the three analytical perspective, will include the feature-based clustering, semantic embedding-based grouping, and role activation patterns. And this comparison support diagnostic subjectivity interpretation. And then the interpretation of convergent signals, textual entries showing semantic coherence and satisfying interpretable roof conditions are treated as stronger subjectivity candidates. And this particularly relevant for identifying implicit subjectivity. The conversion across layers increases interpretative confidence as well. And the treatment of divergence or weak signals are mixed or weak alignment across analytical layers are interpreted as neutral or mixed or ambiguous cases, since this approach avoids forced classification, preserve transparency, and analytical sensitivity also. So for the pseudo labeling, the framework does not rely on single classifier, but it applies a subjectivity scoring and pseudo labeling logic. Will approach synthesize outputs from multiple analytical layers. So thus, quantile based subjectivity threshold will also derive from subjectivity score will be utilized. This threshold assign provisional labels for implicit, explicit, and the neutral or mixed subjectivity. Labels reflect relative subjectivity intensity rather than absolute truth also. So the interpretive nature of pseudo labels are treated as analytically derived indicators, not ground truth. They represent patterns of expression within the data set, and that preserves methodological caution also. So the advantages of layered labeling reduces the over-reliance on any single analytical signal, which mitigating the overconfident classification in ambiguous or indirect language cases. So this approach is really aligned with the subjectivity research best practices according to those person. And purpose of diagnostic analysis, it is conducted for cases with conflicting or weak analytical signals. This step supports transparency rather than performance optimization, and that is acknowledging the absence of ground truth labels also. And then the identification of ambiguity sources, disagreement between semantic similarity feature indicators are and rule activation is really examined. Source of ambiguity including sarcasm, narrative framing, or in mixed evaluative content. These cases are analyzed descriptively. And then afterwards, interpretive validation rule, analysis functions as interpretive validation rather than modal evaluation. It highlights complexity inherent in corruption rule related discourse. This reinforces reflexive assessment of analytic assumption. And then afterwards, the construction of the final data set. So a research data ready data set is produced after hybrid integration, and diagnostic each text entry is assigned a pseudo label for a subjectivity type. Labels include implicit, explicit, and neutral mixed categories also. And for the inclusion of analytical metadata, each many retrains associated analytical metadata. This includes features-based cluster membership, semantic groupings or indicators, and rule activation flags. Metadata supports traceability and interpretability also. And support for reporting and reproducibility. The enriched dataset support further analysis, visualization, and reporting, and that enables generation of tables, figures, indices, and intermediate signals are preserved rather than collapse. And then the advantages of retaining intermediate signals, retaining intermediate outputs avoids opaque final classification, enhances the transparency and reproducibility, and that this design supports future methodological extension according to those person. And overall contribution of hybrid integration, the hybrid framework integrates semantic modeling, interpretative pattern discovery, and structured pseudo labeling, and balances the analytical rigor with explainability. So the approach is sensitive to nuanced corruption related sentiment though. So alignment with the governance oriented research overall, the framework operationalizes subjectivity aware sentiment analysis and governance context, so it maintains methodological transparency and accountability. And this integration support robust analysis of public um, infrastructure discourse already. So let's actually proceed with the results and discussion. This chapter presents the results of the hybrid subjective awareness and sentiment analysis applied to the corruption-related discourse and DPWH flood control project, and reports clustering results feature distribution, semantic embeddings, and association rules, and explain how explicit, neutral, mixed subjectivity appear in public discourse. And this chapter discusses governance implication, methodological limitation, and links findings to transparency, accountability, and SDG 16. So there you have it. So the result, this section presents the empirical outputs generated by the hybrid subjective aware sentiment analysis framework applied from the corruption-related social media discourse on the PWH projects, flight control projects. And this is the results are reported sequentially following the analytical pipeline, including feature-based clustering of outputs and the like. So let's try to work on that. The first step that I have worked on will confirm the successful initialization of the computational environment with all required libraries imported without error. So the verified versions of Pandas will be version 2.2 and NumPy version 2.0.2. And then establish a stable and consistent software configuration for data processing and analysis. This verification ensures that all subsequent analytical stages were conducted within a reliable computational setup. Afterwards, shows the successful loading and initially cleaning of the dataset consisting 195,704 observations and 16 variables. Structure and inspection confirm the presence of social media text, engagement metrics, and metadata suitable for linguistic and contextual analysis. Duplicate checks found no redundant records, and all missing values were resolved through appropriate imputation, resulting in a complete dataset ready for downstream analysis. And in this case here, present the identification and validation of the dataset variable used for text-based analysis column inspection confirm that the text field contain unstructured linguistic content suitable for sentiment analysis. So distinguishing it from identifier, metric, and metadata fields, sample entries verified the presence of natural language expression, typically of social media discourse, especially a reliable foundation for subsequent analysis. If you can see that right there, that was able to successfully produce those kind of text. And the figure 4 will shows the results of applying minimal pre-processing to the text field, focusing on URL removal, on white space normalization while preserving semantic structure. The all 195,537 records met the minimum text length requirements, indicating that the dataset retained sufficiently informative content after pre-processing side by side. Sample confirmed that the original wording was preserved while extraneous elements were removed, ensuring suitability for feature extraction and clustering already. Then afterwards, it also presented the figure 5, the distribution of text length using word count and character count metrics that you can see right there. The our data set, my data set consists mainly of short to moderately sized text with an average of 33.10 words and 214.22 characters per entry, reflecting typical social media discourse. Observed variability and extreme values indicate the presence of longer narratives supporting the relevance of text length features for subsequent analysis. Then the figure 6, the frequency distribution of text entries across varying words counts in the process corpus. The distribution is strongly right skewed, with most text concentrated at lower word counts, reflecting concise social media expression. A long tail toward higher words count indicates the presence of fewer extended narratives supporting variability for subsequent analysis. Then the figure 7 confirms that a successful definition of the linguistic features, extraction functions, and specify the language-based indicators computed from each text entry. The feature set captures the surface level cues related to emphasis, repetition, hedging, pronoun usage, sentence structure, and text length, operationalizing multiple dimension of the subjective expression. These features convert qualitative linguistic patterns to standardize the numerical variables suitable for clustering and subsequent analysis. Afterwards, it will also show the successful extraction of 14 linguistic features from 195,357 text entries, converting unstructured post into unstructured numerical representation. So the extracted features encode indicators of emphasis, then repetition, hedging, pronoun usage, sentence structures, and text length across the entire corpus. So this features matrix that provides the quantitative input required for subsequent scaling, clustering, and linguistic pattern analysis also. And then the figure 9 summarizes the distributional properties of the extracted linguistic features across 195,357 processed text. Most features exhibit low central tendencies with sparse usage, while non-zero means and extreme maximum values indicate the presence of a smaller subset of highly expressive post characterized by punctuation, emphasis, capitalization, repetition, and pronoun usage. Overall, the distribution show generally moderate expressiveness with substantial variability, providing a baseline for interpreting subsequent clustering results. If it's not clear, you can also base in my documentation. I've also submitted that. Then the figure 10 represents the distributions of selected linguistic features prior to clustering. This histogram show the strong right skewness with most text exhibit low or zero values for expressive markers and a smallest subset displaying elevated intensity. These patterns indicate substantial sparsity and non-normality across features, supporting the need for scaling before clustering. Then afterwards, figure 11 confirms the successful standardization of the 14 extracted linguistic features across 195,356 text entries. All features were centered and rescaled to a common numerical scale, producing a normalized features matrix suitable for distance-based clustering. And this standardization prevents features with larger value ranges from proportionately influencing clustering results. Then afterwards, figure 12 presents the evaluation of candidate clusters counts using inertia and silhouette scores for K values from 2 to 7, while inertia decreases steadily with increasing K. The silhouette analysis shows that the highest score at K is equals to, which is 0.7631, followed by a sharp decline for higher cluster counts. This pattern support the selection of two clusters as the most internally coherent and well-separated configuration for the feature space. Then, and figure 13 shows the result of K-means clustering with K equals 2 applied to the standardized linguistic feature set, assigning all 195,357 texts to one of two clusters. The distribution is highly imbalanced with 193,373 texts in cluster 0 and 1,84 text in cluster 1, indicating a dominant group and a much smaller subset with distinct feature profiles. So this separation aligns with earlier distributional findings, suggesting that strongly expressive or stylistically intensified linguistic patterns occur infrequently within the corpus. Then the figure 14 presents their linguistic profiles of the two clusters and highlights the features that differentiate them from the overall data set. So cluster 0 closely aligns with corpus-wide averages and represent baseline less linguistically marked expression, while cluster 1 shows pronounced deviation in text length and then structural complexity, pronoun usage, hedging, capitalization, or repetition. These profiles indicate a separation between a dominant cluster of concise, neutral text and a smaller cluster characterized by more expressive and rhetorically intensified discourse. And the figure 15 represents the representative text samples illustrating linguistic differences between the two clusters. Samples from cluster 0 consist of concise and direct post with limited elaboration and fewer stylistic intensifiers. And while cluster 1 samples display longer statements, capitalization, emphatic framing, and more rhetorically structured language. So these examples connect numerical features differences to observable language patterns, supporting the interpretability of the clustering result. Then the figure 16 presents the rule-based labeling of clusters using weighted linguistic feature patterns associated with explicit, implicit, and objective subjectivity categories. Both clusters receive their highest score under the explicit category, with cluster 1 showing substantially stronger intensity linked feature values than cluster 0, resulting in all 195,357 texts being classified as explicit. This outcome indicates that the current weighting and decision rules favor explicit subjectivity signals, limiting differentiation into implicit or objective categories. Now, figure 17 also shows the highest weighted unigrams and bigrams and identified through the IDF modeling for the label dataset because all texts were assigned to a single category. The results reflect high frequency and broadly distributed terms, including common Filipino and English functions words alongside relevant terms such as DPWH and flood control. These patterns indicate thematic alignment with DPWH flood control discourse well, also suggesting that greater lexical distinctiveness would require additional preprocessing of multiple labels. So in my figure 18 presents the representative validation examples illustrating how the assigned subjective labels corresponds to observable linguistic cues in individual text. All samples are drawn from the explicit category and shown the variation in stylistic and intensity, including differences in capitalization, exclamation usage, hedging, frequency, and first person involvement. And these examples support interpretability by linking numeric features values to actual text behavior while also highlighting the lack of category diversity produced by the current labeling logic. So next, the figure 19 shows a two-dimensional PCA projection of the standardized linguistic features matrix with the first two components explaining approximately 46.3% of the total variance. The distribution is densely concentrated near the origin with greater spread along PC1, then indicating broadly similar features profiles for most text and a smaller subset of linguistically extreme outliers because all of the observations share the same subjectivity label. So the projection reflects within class variation rather than separation between subjectivity types. So figure 20 reports the final data integrity checks conducted after preprocessing, feature extraction and clustering. So the result confirmed that all 195,357 observations were attained. Required columns were present and no missing values were detected in key variables. These checks check the individual that the analytical pipeline preserved data set completeness and structured consistency. And the figure 21 represents the distribution of the computed implicitness scores across the data set, reflecting the degree of indirect or nuanced subjectivity in the text. The scores show low central tendencies, mean as 0.022, for the median as 0.019, with limited variability for most observation, indicating minimal reliance on hedge or indirect expression. A small number of extreme values suggest that implicit subjectivity is present only in minority of text, reinforcing the dominance of explicit linguistic and signaling the corpus also. Now, figure 22 shows the final categorization of text into explicit, implicit, and neutral mixed groups using quantile-based threshold applied to the implicitness score. Text below to the 20th percentile, 0.0092, were labeled explicit. Text above the 80th percentile, 0.0344, were labeled implicit, and the remaining entries were classified as neutral mixed, resulting in 59.91% neutral mixed, 20.06% explicit, and 20.3 implicit text. This result demonstrate that the implicitness score enables scalability partitioning of the corpus into interpretable subjective strata for comparative analysis. So figure 23 presents representative text samples validating the final explicit, implicit, and neutral mixed subjectivity. Labels explicit example shows overt, evaluative language, and intensified stylistic use. Implicit examples convey the opinion through indirect framing and contextual narration. And neutral or mixed samples combine factual reporting with limited evaluative elements. These examples support the validity of the implicitness based labeling scheme by illustrating clear linguistic differences across subjectivity categories. Then afterwards, figure 24 documents the successful initialization of the sentence-BERT environment for generating semantic embeddings. The Firepraise multilingual mini LM or L12 version 2 model was correctly loaded with all required configuration files, tokenizer components, and model weights initialized without interruption despite the absence of a Hugging Face access token. So this setup establishes the foundation for representing mixed Filipino English text as dense semantic vectors for subsequent meaning-based analysis. And in my figure 25 confirms that the successful generation of sentence level semantic embeddings for all 195,357 process texts using the SBERT model, each text was encoded into 384 dimensional vector, producing a normalized embedding matrix suitable for similarity based analysis and clustering. So this result indicate that the corpus was effectively transformed into a high dimensional semantic featurescape, a space for subsequent meaning-based analysis. And then figure 26% the results of clustering text in SBERT embedding space using mini batch k-means with a k equals 5, partitioning all 195,357 texts into 5 semantics clusters of varying sizes. The distribution shows multiple sizable cluster rather than a single dominant group, indicating the presence of diverse semantic or thematic patterns within the corpus. A true component PCA projection is included for visualization, capturing a modest proportion of variance, which is expected given the high dimensional nature of SBERT embeddings. And it summarizes implicitness patterns across SBERT derived semantic clusters, showing variation in how subjectivity is expressed within meaning-based groupings. Cluster 3 and 4 as the highest implicitness levels, while cluster 2 exhibits the lowest implicitness on the highest concentrations of explicit subjective text. Cluster 0 and 1 display intermediate patterns indicating systematic differences between indirect and overt evaluative expression across semantic. So, Figure 28 shows the conversion of continuous linguistic features into categorical bins and using quantile-based threshold for association rule mining. Core expressive indicators and SBERT-derived semantic cluster membership were included as categorical items, preserving relative intensity patterns while reducing the impact of the extreme values. This discretized representation use structures the dataset for extracting interpretable rules, linking linguistic, semantic, and subjectivity patterns. And for figure 29 illustrates how each text instance is transformed into transaction containing discretized linguistic features and SBERT derived semantic cluster identifier and a subjectivity label. Continuous features are converted into a categorical bins, low, mid, high to ensure compatibility with rule-based patterns discovery. And that the presentation enable the um, identification of interpretable association between linguistic cues, semantic context, and subjectivity outcomes. Then afterwards, the figure 30 summarizes the strongest association rules mined using FP growth, focusing on rules whose consequence correspond to subjectivity labels. The rules link combinations of discretized linguistic indicators and, in some cases, as word cluster membership to explicit or implicit subjectivity with support, confidence, and lift values indicating non-trivial occurrence and diagnostic strength. Patterns associated with implicit labels emphasize hedging and discourse structure, while explicit rules align more strongly with intensity and directness markers. Figure 31 presents the strongest association rules linked to implicit subjectivity, showing the recurring combination of discretized linguistic cues such as hedging, the repetition and sentence structures. The rule exhibit moderate support to 1% of the corpus, high confidence often above 60.60, and very high lift values indicating that those patterns strongly increase the likelihood of implicit classification beyond chance. The dominant rules emphasize the indirect expression through hedging and elaborated structure with reduced intensity markers aligning implicit subjectivity with classified and less overtly empathic language. Now, with the figure 32, documents the verification step used to confirm the correct dataset field for a textual analysis column previous were inspected to differentiate identifiers engagement with metrics, metadata, and linguistic content, after which text column was explicitly selected as the analysis source. So this validation step ensures that all subsequent pre-processing feature extraction and modeling procedures operate on the intended natural language inputs. And my figure 33 shows that the SBERT-based logistic regression classifier achieves the balanced performance in distinguishing explicit and implicit subjectivity. Precision recall are high for both classes with symmetric F1 scores of 89% and an overall accuracy of 89%. These results indicate that the SBERT embeddings provided sufficient semantic information for reliable um, subjectivity classification in multilingual political discourse. Then, lastly, summarizes error analysis results showing 1,684 misclassified texts where predicated labels differed from the reference label. Most error occurs in borderline or ambiguous posts containing overlapping cues of explicit and implicit subjectivity, including short fragments, rhetorical phrasing, irony, and mixed evaluative signals. These cases indicate that remaining misclassification are concentrated in nuanced discourse types, suggesting limits in handling pragmatics and context rather than broad modal failure. So that's the results show the corruption-related discourse on DPWH controlled projects is dominated by explicit subjectivity, while implicit Subjectivity remains systematically present but less frequent and linguistically distinct. Feature-based clustering and implicit scoring reveal a dominant baseline group, a smaller, highly expressive subset, and a substantial neutral or mixed space that cannot be captured by surface level intensity markers alone. Semantic modeling with SBERT and association rule mining confirm that the subjectivity is multi-layered, demonstrating the effectiveness of the hybrid framework in balancing semantic sensitivity and interpretability and governance-oriented analysis aligned with SDG 16. Now, for the findings and analysis, it will reveal the corruption related discourse on DPWH flight control exhibits layer and heterogeneous patterns of subjectivity. It is expressed through explicit, implicit, and neutral mixed forms that are not fully captured by surface level sentiment indicators alone. So a hybrid framework combining clustering, semantic modeling, and rule-based analysis enables structured interpretation of these patterns. Now, for the interpretation of cluster characteristic, feature-based clustering shows a highly imbalanced distribution with most text grouped into a dominant baseline cluster. So this cluster is characterized by short length and low punctuation emphasis, minimal capitalization, and limited repetition. And these patterns reflect restraint and routine expressions typical of large-scale social media discourse. And then a smaller cluster exhibit for the highly expressive cluster characteristics elevated linguistic features such as longer text, higher sentence counts, repetition, capitalization, and pronoun use. This characteristic indicate heightened expressive intensity and rhetorical elaboration. The imbalance between clusters suggests that overt stylistic intensity is present but represent a minority pattern in public discourse as quoted with that those authors also. Then the manifestation of implicit subjectivity emerged primarily through discourse level characteristic rather than overt emotional markers. With higher implicit scores, use longer sentences, hedging expression, interrogative framing, and structure complexity. These features allow evaluative meaning to be conveyed indirectly. And for the neutral and mixed subjectivity patterns, quantile-based satisfaction shows that a substantial portion of text fall into a neutral or mixed category. This text blend factual narration with subtle evaluative undertones. Then this distribution supports the view that subjectivity exists along a continuum rather than rigid categories according to those principles. Then the comparison with traditional approaches, traditional sentiment analysis method equate the subjectivity with overt emotional intensity. Such approaches systematically overlook indirect and context-dependent evaluative language common in corruption discourse according to those person. As a result, implicit subjectivity is under-detected in conventional models. And strength of the hybrid framework integrates linguistic features as BERT-based semantic embeddings and association rule mining, which semantic clustering captures meaning-based groupings, while association rules provide transparent explanation of subjectivity patterns. So this design balances analytical sensitivity and interpretability according to them. And the consistency and robustness of findings result across features clustering, implicitness scoring, semantic modeling, and road mining converge on the same structural conclusions. Explicit subjectivity dominates this stylistically, while implicit subjectivity remains systematic and distinct. The strong performance of the SBERT-based classifier support the reliability of semantic representations. Now, complexity and limitation observed, misclassified in borderline cases highlight the challenges proposed by sarcasm, rhetorical framing, and limited context. These cases demonstrate the complexity of corruption-related communication. They enforce the need for a hybrid approach that avoids reliance on a single um, unethical signal for it all and those author. And then the overall conclusion of findings, subjectivity in corruption related discourse is inherently multidimensional as it extends beyond overt emotional expression to include indirect and structurally embedded evaluative cues. The hybrids SBERT and association rule mining framework effectively captures this complexity and support governance oriented analysis aligned with sustainable development 16. And for the discussion, this section interpret the implications of the study's findings in relation to theory, governance, practice, ethics, and SDG 16 rather than restating results. It explains the significance for subject-aware sentiment analysis and corruption-related public infrastructure discourse. So there you have it. Theoretical implications, the finding reinforce the theoretical distinction between explicit and implicit subjectivity subjectivity in political and corruption related discourse. Observed patterns support the view that subjectivity operates as a gradient phenomenon rather than a binary state. Then semantic embeddings further demonstrate contextual coherence is a key dimension of evaluative expression. And then the alignment between discourse level for the extension of subjectivity theory, features, and semantic similarity shows that the subjectivity is embedded in narrative structures, framing, and modality. So this is especially relevant in socially sensitive domains such as corruption discourse, where direct evaluation is often avoided. So the study empirically validates the hybrid representation that integrate linguistic form and semantic meaning. So the governance relevance, the findings highlight the value of subjectivity aware sentiment analysis for monitoring public perceptions of DPWH flight control projects. Public discourse reflect not only overt dissatisfaction but also subtle skepticism and distrust embedded in descriptive narratives. These indirect signals may indicate emerging concerns not yet visible through formal governance channels. And the practical implication for governance by detecting both explicit and implicit subjectivity. The framework provides a more comprehensive view of public sentiment than traditional tools. This capability is particularly important in disaster risk management and infrastructure governance, where trust and responsiveness are critical. The findings suggest that the subjectivity aware analytics can support proactive governance and institutional self assessment, of course, and unexpected outcomes and analytical implications. Initial convergence toward explicit subjectivity in feature based clustering highlighted that the limitations of surface level linguistic markers. This outcome demonstrate how intensity focused indicators can obscure indirect evaluative meaning in politically charged discourse rather than weakening the framework. This result reinforces the need for multi layered analytical strategies also. Now, the importance of hybrid and adaptive analysis, the resolution of this limitation through implicit scoring and semantic modeling confirms the value of adaptive analytical design. Subjectivity, the incorruption related discourse cannot be reliably captured through a single analytical lens. This aligns with methodological insight emphasizing hybrid and iterative approaches in NLP research. And the ethical and interpretability consideration, the study raises ethical concerns related to black box sentiment analysis in politically sensitive contexts. Misinterpretation of public discourse may affect the institutional decision making and public trust. The hybrid framework addresses this by integrating interpretable features and rule based explanation. And then transparency and responsible use. Association rules provide transparent justification for subjectivity, classification supporting traceability and accountability. And the use of pseudo labeling reflects ethical caution in context with linguistic ambiguity and subjective interpretation. And that approach aligns with guidelines emphasizing explainability and proportional inference. And now the implication for sustainability development goal 16, the findings directly support SDG 16 by enabling interpretable analysis of public perception, of institutional integrity, subjectivity aware sentiment analysis function as an early diagnostic tool for identifying distrust and dissatisfaction in public discourse. Such insight complement formal accountability mechanism in infrastructure's governance. Now, the discussion summary shows that the subjectivity in corruption related discourse is theoretically complex, governance really relevant, and ethically sensitive. The hybrid framework advances the theory, supports governance monitoring, and prioritizes interpretability and restraint. Overall, the study demonstrates how subjectivity aware sentiment analysis can contribute to institutional strengthening and SDG 16. Now, the limitation here, while the study present a robust and interpretable framework, several limitations must be acknowledged. So this constraint relate to the data set, computational design, modeling assumption, and so on and the like. Let's try to check what are those. Now, the dataset limitation, the dataset consists exclusively of social media posts related to the WH flight control project, introducing representational constraints. Social media data reflect uneven participation and self selection bias, potentially over representing vocal or politically engaged users. So, as a result, the discourse may not fully represent broader affected communities also. Then social media text, noise and temporal constraints is inherently noisy, informal, and often lacks sufficient contextual information. Short or fragmented post may limit accurate interpretation. of evaluative intent despite minimal preprocessing. Additionally, the dataset is temporally bounded, restricting analysis of longitudinal changes in subjectivity. Then the computational constraints, the scale of the dataset and complexity of the pipeline imposed practical computational limits, although efficient methods were used. Exploration of alternative models, hyperparameters, and higher resolution clustering was constrained. Some analytical choices were guided by feasibility rather than exhaustive optimization. Then dimensionality reduction limitations. Dimensionality reduction techniques such as PCA were applied mainly for visualization and diagnostic. These methods capture only limited proportion of variance in high-dimensional features and embedding spaces. As a result, visual projections offer limited support for definitive structural inference, according to those author. Modeling assumptions, the implicitness score relies on weighted linguistic indicators assumed to signal indirect evaluation, while theoretically grounded. These indicators may not capture all forms of implicit subjectivity, such as sarcasm or culturally specific rhetoric. Thus, some evaluative expression may remain underrepresented. And pseudo-labeling and rule limitation. Quantile-based pseudo-labeling assumes subjectivity is relative within the data set. These labels are analytically derived on or not equivalent to expert annotated ground truth. Then association rules reflect frequent co-occurrence patterns rather than causal relationship according to those person. And generalizability constraints. The findings are context specific to DPWH flag control project in the Philippines governance setting and linguistic practices. Political sensitivities and institutional structures may limit direct transferability to other domains, and patterns of subjectivity may differ across countries and policy contexts. And multilingual and cultural consideration, the corpus includes both Filipino and English text, introducing linguistic and cultural variability. And while multilingual experts support cross linguistic representation, subtle pragmatic cues may still be captured also. And domain specific recalibration is necessary for application in other governance contexts, according to those authors. So the study limitation stem from social media data, characteristics, computational constraints, modeling assumptions, and contextual specificity. Um, these limitations do not diminish the study contribution, but define appropriate analytical boundaries. They also highlight the opportunities for future research that strengthen subjectivity aware sentiment analysis in governance context. So let's try to work. Let's try to move on into the chapter 5 conclusions and recommendations. So this will highlight also the conclusion, recommendation, and future research, of course. So for conclusion, this study addressed a key methodological challenge in corruption-related sentiment analysis and distinguishing implicit and explicit subjectivity in governance discourse. In discussions on DPWH flood control projects, evaluative meaning is often conveyed indirectly through narrative framing rather than direct accusation. Traditional polarity based sentiment analysis is therefore insufficient for capturing the full range of subjectivity present in such discourse. And then the findings demonstrate that subjectivity in corruption related public discourse is multidimensional and linguistically heterogeneous. Public perceptions of corruption, inefficiency, and lack of transparency are systematically embedded in descriptive and contextual language. This pattern confirmed that that subjectivity is structured rather than incidental and governance related communications for the nature of subjectivity in corruption discourse. Now, the hybrid framework development. To address this challenge, the study designed a hybrid analytical framework integrating SBERT features based on linguistic analysis and associational mining. This framework combines semantic modeling with interpretable linguistic and structural indicators. The integration enables subjectivity aware analysis beyond surface level emotion expression. Then the role of semantic modeling SBERT was shown to effectively capture contextual and semantic nuances not observable through surface level linguistic features alone. This capability is particularly important for text characterized by indirect valuation and narrative framing. Then semantic embeddings therefore play a critical role in identifying implicit subjectivity. The contribution of features-based and rule-based analysis, feature-based clustering, and association rule mining provide interpretable insight into stylistic intensity, discourse, structure, and hedging behavior. Association rules reveal that implicit subjectivity is consistently linked to structural elaboration, hedging, and reduced intensity. These findings support theoretical claims that corruption-related opinions are often communicated indirectly. So comparison with traditional approaches, the comparative analysis shows that the hybrid framework outperforms traditional sentiment analysis approaches in subjectivity awareness. Conventional methods often conflate objective reporting with subjective evaluation of or overlook implicit sentiment entirely. The hybrid approach enables reliable differentiation between implicit, explicit, and neutral mixed subjectivity. And for the methodological contributions, the study contributes a structured and replicable framework for subjectivity aware sentiment analysis by integrating clustering, implicit scoring, semantic modeling, and rule based reasoning. The framework balances semantic depth and interpretability and scalability. The use of pseudo label reflects ethical caution in analyzing political sensitive discourse. And for the governance and ethical significance, the finding shows that the corruption related discourse in DPWH flood control project cannot be adequately analyzed using intensity driven techniques alone. The hybrid framework offers a transparent and context sensitive approach suitable for governance oriented research. This design mitigates concern related to black box classification and support methodological accountability. So, in conclusion, the study demonstrates that subjectivity in corruption-related public discourse requires a multi-layered analytical approach. The proposed hybrid SBERT and association rule mining framework enables nuanced differentiation of implicit, explicit, and neutral mixed sentiments by advancing subjectivity-aware sentiment analysis. The study supports transparency, accountability, and institutional trust in alignment with SDG 16. Now, the recommendation based on the findings and limitation of the study, several recommendations are proposed to enhance practical application and methodological advancement. So, like the policy application, policymakers are encouraged to integrate subjectivity aware sentiment analysis into public feedback and monitoring systems for infrastructure and disaster risk management projects such as analytics can capture easy indicators of public concern, distrust, or dissatisfaction embedded in routine social media discourse. Detecting implicit subjectivity is particularly valuable for identifying emerging governance issues before they become explicit complaints. In flood control and disaster preparedness, context subjectivity aware insight can help distinguish factual reporting from evaluative perceptions of institutional performance. This insight may inform communication strategies, transparency initiatives, and policy adjustment. Analytical output should function as decision support tools rather than definitive judgment supporting the SDG 16 aligned governance. Now, institutional use DPWH and related agencies. Implementing agencies such as DPWH may adapt subjectivity aware sentiment analysis to strengthen institutional self assessment and public engagement. The hybrid framework can be integrated into monitoring dashboard to track shift and public discourse overall. This enables differentiation between over dissatisfaction, subtle skepticism, and neutral or mixed reactions. Then the responsible institutional adoption. Institutions are encouraged to form interdisciplinary teams combining data science, governance, and public communication expertise, such as collaboration, support contextual and ethical interpretation of analytical outputs. Internal guidelines should emphasize the transparency, proportional inference, and respect for public expression. And for future research, should explore supervised or semi-supervised learning using expert annotated dataset to complement labeling. Created annotation may improve robustness in edge cases involving sarcasm, irony, or culturally specific expression. This extension can refine subjectivity classification boundaries. And temporal and explainability extensions. Researchers are encouraged to incorporate temporal and longitudinal modeling to analyze shift in subjectivity over time, examining responses to policy announcement, disasters, or institutional across can reveal sentiment dynamics. Additional explainable AI techniques may further enhance interpretability alongside association rule mining. And the cross-domain and generalizability extension, applying the framework to other governance domains such as public health, transportation, education, or elections is recommended. Domain-specific adaptation of feature semantic models on rule threshold can support comparative validation. This will strengthen the generalizability and establish subjectivity aware sentiment analysis as a versatile public sector tool. And the recommendation emphasized policy integration, responsible institutional adoption, and continued methodological refinement. Together, they support the ethical and scalable use of subjectively aware sentiment analysis and governance. This direction aimed to enhance transparency, accountability, and evidence-based decisions making aligned with SDG 16. So, lastly, the future work. Future research may extend subjectivity-aware sentiment analysis by improving data scope, labeling strategies, domain coverage, and explainable modeling. This direction aimed to strengthen the validity, scalability, and applicability in governance context. They also address dimension not fully covered in their current research design and larger, more diverse data set. Future studies should expand a data set across platforms, time horizons, and geographic communities to reduce sampling bias. Longitudinal data capturing discourse before and after flood events or project milestone may reveal shifts in implicit and explicit subjectivity. Incorporating complementary sources such as public consultation, complaints logs, and media reports can strengthen interpretive reliability. So, supervised and semi supervised extensions, future work may incorporate supervised or semi supervised learning using expert annotated dataset while pseudo labeling support scalability. Curated annotation can improve validity for sarcasm, irony, and culturally embedded expression. Hybrid strategies such as weak supervision and active learning may further refine classification boundary. Then addressing the ambiguity and subjectivity, expert guided annotation schemes should include clear guidelines agreement and then measures and adjudication procedures. These steps can reduce misclassification in short, low context, or rhetorically complex text. Such extensions strengthen reliability in distinguishing implicit and explicit subjectivity. Then the application to other governance domains. The framework should be applied beyond DPWH flood control to other governance areas such as procurement, public health, transportation, education, and social welfare. And cross-valid domain validation can assess whether subjectivity patterns are stable or require recalibration. This supports broader generalizability of subjectivity aware sentiment analysis and multi-stakeholder governance analysis. Future studies may examine discourse involving multiple actors such as government agencies, contractors, and civil society groups. This allows analysis of how subjectivity varies by speaker role and institutional relationship. Such insight can enhance government analytics by contextualizing evaluative expression. An exploration of alternative explainable models. Future may explore explainably modeling approaches beyond association rule mining. Potential methods include features attribution, concept-based explanations, and counterfactual analysis. These techniques can provide richer and more localized interpretability. And for interpretable model architectures, researchers may investigate inherently interpretable models such as prototype-based, classifier, or sparse linear models. Separating discourse structures from semantic content may improve transparency. Combining these models with transformer embeddings can balance performance and accountability. And future research should explain dataset, strengthening label validity, test cross-domain applicability, and advanced explainable modeling. These directions enhance reliability and generalizability and ethical defensibility. They reinforces the role of subjectivity aware sentiment analysis in supporting transparency and accountability aligned with SDG 16. So that's the end of my presentation. This is the references that I have work on also. And thank you so much, sir, for um able to, I mean, spending time to watch my video. And by the way, I just wanted to also answer that the result means that most user directly state their opinions, emotion, or accusation when talking about DBWH flood control project rather than hiding their opinion inside neutral sounding statement. So, of course, they were able to explain it very clearly and confidently um I mean, they were able to address, give their um their opinion explicitly than thoughts implicit. So they, if to if for the significance of my study, also just to add as well, the significance of my study is that it really proves what traditional sentiment analysis is insufficient for governance related discourse, while explicit opinions dominate the data set. My study shows that implicit subjectivity still exists in a structured and linguistically distinct way. So these implicit opinions are expressed through narrative style hedging and sentence structures rather than emotional words. So without the um subjectivity aware framework, these indirect opinions would be misclassified as neutral or objective, leading to an underestimation of public dissatisfaction. My hybrid SBERT and association role mining approach makes this hidden evaluation visible and interpretable and measurable also. So that's the end of my presentation, sir. So my study is really significant because it shows that while citizens mostly express corruption concern explicitly, a non-trivial portion of public opinion is communicated implicitly, and without subjectivity-aware analysis, these subtle but important signals would be completely overlooked. Also, thank you so much, sir, and have a great day and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year in advance.